Well, good morning and welcome to Elevenses. Once again, I'm Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training. This is show number 167 and it's Sunday, the 29th of August. Got some news today. The Humber Bridge was closed for 9 hours after a collision between a rider and another vehicle on Thursday evening. Driving instructors are being balloted on taking strike action, which would be bad news for anybody hoping for a bike test in the near future. Some departments are raising the national rural speed limit back to 90 kph, but it won't happen everywhere. The Macau Grand Prix looks likely to be another casualty of COVID. Triumph, are they making the bike they should have built a decade ago? I'll ask that question and cover that today. We'll also look at what Bell staff are calling a capsule collection. You probably have to look that term up. I certainly did. Today's discussion point is an interesting one. Why do more women fail the Mod 1 bike test than men, particularly when the pass rates for the Mod 2 are the same? So settle yourself down for the next 30 minutes or so, and we'll take you through those particular items. Now, don't forget, where's my banners gone? There they are. They've just disappeared for a moment. If you've got a question, a comment, anything you want to ask, do drop me a line. If there's anything you'd like me to recover on a future show, do ask. I'm more than happy to do so. I will try and get back to you during the show if I possibly can. If not, I will answer you via the comment stream after the show here on Facebook. So far, Clive has looked in and said, good morning. Hello there, Clive. Nice to see you again. Right, so on with the first item then. The southbound carriageway of the Humber Bridge was closed for almost 9 hours after a crash on Thursday evening. The incident happened around 6 p.m. and it involved a motorcycle and a car, and it happened close to the toll booths on the southbound carriageway. Now, if you know the area, the bridge is the only crossing point of the river for quite some distance. You have to go a long way inland once that bridge is closed, and not surprisingly, heavy traffic and congestion built up around the routes on both sides of the bridge. Humberside Police urged drivers to take an alternative route wherever possible, and the air ambulance attended the scene of the crash. Now, the northbound carriageway reopened at 11 p.m, so that's almost 5 hours later, but it wasn't until 3 a.m. that traffic stuck on the southbound carriageway was free to move. That left many drivers stuck on the bridge for almost 9 hours, and some drivers abandoned their vehicles to actually walk home. So exactly how they cope with that, I have no idea. Perhaps they simply towed them away. I don't know. Anyway, Humberside Police have said that the motorcyclist involved in the crash is currently in a critical condition with life-threatening injuries, and they're appealing for witnesses and asking anyone with information to call 101. Now, second story this morning is about the proposed strike that could happen involving driving instructors. Now, almost 500,000 tests were cancelled as a result of the COVID shutdowns, and that has caused an unprecedented backlog of candidates awaiting their tests, not surprisingly. But the bad news is that DVSA really struggled to deal with the backlog. You may recall from earlier shows that DVSA have taken on more car examiners, and as I said at the time, that could hopefully free up some of those car examiners to do bike tests, because some examiners are sort of qualified for both modes of transport. And I also mentioned that the DVSA were recruiting some motorcycle examiners, and that campaign is on at the moment, but strictly limited numbers. I think it was 7 that they were looking for. Well, at the moment, with test weights averaging out between 4 and 5 months, you can imagine that 7 extra examiners spread across the country really is a drop in the ocean. So if you're preparing to get your bike test organised, be ready for some bad news. The Public and Commercial Services Union announced on Friday that they are balloting their members on possible strike action. So you're probably wondering what the strike action is all about. And essentially, it's about a trial that the DVSA they wanting to carry out. Apart from working overtime and moving to 7-day working, which does have some obvious benefits. One thing that they want to look at is increasing the number of driving tests that each examiner manages during each day. Currently it's 7, and they want to move it up to 8. Now, in theory, that sounds great because basically it would offer 5 extra tests per examiner per week, and allowing for holidays, that could be up to getting on for 200 extra tests a year. So what's the problem with that? Well, the answer is that the extra test has to be fitted in by reducing the gap between the existing tests. Now, at the moment, there is a 30-minute break at midday for examiners, according to the schedule that I've seen. 5 tests happen before that break and 2 happen after. As far as I understand it, the schedule allows for a 57-minute gap between each test. And with the driving test slot actually being slightly longer than 40 minutes, if I remember right from when I was a basic instructor, it was 43 minutes. And the aim is to get car drivers at least out on the road for around 40 minutes of that time slot. So if you allow a little bit for overruns and things when driving tests are slightly laid back, and you allow for the time it takes for the examiner to walk to the car and to walk back from the car, you can figure out that there is in fact something around about 10 or 12 minutes between tests for the examiner. Now, if you have to slot the tests, an extra test into the existing time frame, and the 30-minute lunch break is maintained, which I believe is a legal requirement, then the gaps between the other tests would be reduced, according to my calculations, to around 3 minutes. In other words, the examiner would walk back to the test centre just about in time to maybe dash to the loo, probably not time to grab a cup of tea before they have to come out and greet the candidate for the next test. Now, predictably, examiners aren't too happy with that plan, and they're suggesting that the amount of focus that is needed to actually deal with a learner driver on the road would be too stressful and too tiring with that very limited break between tests. Now, as an instructor myself, I know there's a lot more to assessing a rider or driver than simply going out for a bit of a ride. And I'm not sure as a candidate either that I would be too happy with an examiner who's getting towards the end of a day when he's actually had very little in the way of breaks. Would he be able to monitor my riding or driving appropriately? And that's not just in terms of scoring the ride or drive. There are potential safety issues here because the examiner is required to step in if the candidate does something that puts anybody at risk, either the people in the learner car or bikes or other members of the public. So why not extend the day or offer overtime? Well, the answer is that the DVSA appear to want to clear the backlog up without offering extra pay. Right now, the union have announced the ballot is to go ahead for strike action. The outcome will obviously be some weeks away. Not all examiners are in the union, so they wouldn't strike or work to rule, whatever the outcome of the ballot actually is. But clearly, any examiners withdrawing their labour at the moment will further impact waiting lists. And it's not just candidates, of course, who are affected. Yes, if you're waiting for a test, it's incredibly frustrating to have to sit for months on end waiting to get your test, but it also affects the driving schools and the bike training schools. If they can't get tests, then there's little incentive for trainees to actually book up a course. And of course, it's doubly bad for bike training schools because motorcyclists have to take 2 tests, the Module 1 off-road test and the Module 2 on-road tests. And they've already had significant problems getting the right balance of those sorted out for training schools. I've heard stories far too many times of driving test centres offering a slew of Module 2 tests and then having to cancel them all because the trainees were actually waiting for Module 1 tests, but nothing had been scheduled to cope with that. knows. So the DVSA statement to driving schools says that we know that you and your pupils may have concerns on how this will affect driving tests. We're working hard with the PCS to resolve their concerns, and we will update you again if there's going to be any impact on our services. Okay, so at the moment it's waiting to see what happens in the ballot, but it's really a pretty depressing situation for driving schools and anybody looking to get a test in any category to be back in. And we've got the lorry driver shortage as well, where they were supposed to be prioritizing HGV. So it really is a real mess at the moment. Morning, Paul. Thank you. Paul says, great lineup of topics as always. And he says, thanks for the efforts you go to. So I'm so pleased with that. I'll put it up as a, there we go. I'll put it up on screen. So thank you, Paul, for those nice words. That's very kind of you. Right. Okay. So don't forget, if you want to catch these shows on a regular basis, you can grab them on Wednesdays and Sundays at 11. They are nearly always live. Occasionally I have to do a recorded show for purposes to cope with other activities I might be involved in. But if I can, I do them live. Right. Okay. So now, second story or third story of the day, you may recall that the speed limit for departmental roads across France was compulsorily dropped to 80 kph right across the country. Now, that took place in July 2018, and the claim was that the new lower limit would actually lead to a significant reduction in road deaths per year. The change was controversial, predictably. Critics said that the reduction would not make roads safer, but would significantly increase journey times. France being a fairly big country, and if you do need to go long distances, 10 kph less on your speedo will make quite a difference to the time it takes you to get from A to B. Now, Prime Minister Edouard Philippe recently responded by saying that local authorities would be free to set their own limits, and they would be able to revert back to 90 kph if they wished. Now, that news actually came out earlier this year, but I missed it at the time, so I've only just picked it up. But this is apparently what's happening. Some, but not all, departments in France are returning to the original 90 kph limit, but not all. Haute-Marne was one of those first departments that announced that it would go back to the 90 kph, and they were joined by a number of others, including Côte d'Or, Moselle, and Corrèze. But 7 departments have said they're going to stick at 80 kph. Meurthe-et-Moselle, Loire-Atlantique, Rhône, Ardèche, Gard, Var, and Ardennes are all going to stay with the lower limit. Now, what that will mean, of course, is that every time you pass into a new department, you'll have to scan the road to see what the new speed limit is. And these mixed limits has led to claims that it will be confusing for drivers, and that France should actually stick to a single national standard, and that a mix of speed limits on rural roads would quickly become unmanageable, to which all I can say is, come to England. Right, okay. Rather faster than 80 kph is the Macau Grand Prix. If you've ever watched it, it's a fairly spectacular event round a road circuit in the former Portuguese enclave in China. But the 2021 event, the 54th edition of this race, is actually under serious threat of cancellation. And that's due to a 21-day quarantine period that's being imposed as part of local COVID-19 protocols. Now, last year's race was called off after riders were told they'd have to undertake a mandatory 14-day quarantine period in a designated hotel. Now, not too surprisingly, the majority of riders weren't happy with that, and they pulled out, leaving no racers and so no race. An even longer quarantine period being proposed this year seems very unlikely the race will go ahead as planned in November. And Irish road racer Michael Sweeney was reported as saying that 3 weeks in a hotel room, it's just asking too much. And that has even changed from last year when they were asking for a 14-day quarantine. It's just not possible. Some of us had suggested we could be tested when we landed, then quarantine in a hotel for 5 days, test us again. If we're clear, we could be allowed to free flow after that. The headline FIA Formula 3 and GT World Cup races at Macau have already been axed for the second consecutive year because of these restrictions. So I guess that's probably the Macau Motorcycle Grand Prix going the same way. Now, if you enjoy the show, don't forget you can head over to my Ko-fi page, and you can support me over there. And if you do so, if you buy me a coffee over there, you get a month's access to my back catalogue of Facebook posts. It's currently 500 plus over there. I'm just putting up the 2019 post now, which means 2014 to 2018, 100 a year are all up and ready to read. There are plenty of free ones over there that you can slip along the index and have a look at and read and decide whether it's worth it. And I hope you will find that it actually is worth it. Sarah has just looked in, and she says, first time watching, very informative. Thank you. Well, thank you, Sarah. Thank you very much indeed for popping in. Very good, kind of you. And I hope you come back and enjoy some of the other shows that we are going to do in the future. Right. So, question that I posed was, are Triumph about to build the bike they should have built a decade ago? Now, go back a couple of decades and think about the bikes which actually filled the streets. And three of the most popular were actually the 600 Bandit, the 600 Hornet, and the original Yamaha diversion, the XJ600. Now, all three were stripped down versions of sportier bikes, usually using older engines, but they sold like hotcakes. Not just on the price point, although that was clearly an attractive feature of what they were all about, but partly because they also had a more upright riding position, which made them a bit easier to ride. And not everybody wanted a bike covered in plastic, even though many, myself, including myself, wanted some weather protection. So all three machines actually came not only with a naked bike version, but also a half faired version. And I still have my 2002 faired Hornet. And even now, 20 years on, it's still an excellent do anything, go anywhere bike. It's a perfect bike for training. It's because it's reasonably light and maneuverable. It's easy to ride, basically. It's reasonably cheap to run, reasonably frugal on petrol. It's got just enough weather protection to undertake longer rides at motorway speeds, even in poor conditions. And it's actually a hoot on the track too. I've done everything from touring Europe with camping gear stuck on the back to several hundred laps around the brand's Indy circuit on it, and it copes with everything. Move along 10 years though, and not just the 600s that I'm talking about, but also pretty much the entire middleweight breed of bikes was starting to vanish. If you think what was actually available, you're looking at things like the V-Strom 650 and the SV 650, relatively little else. Now, part of the reason for that was that the manufacturers, ably abetted by the bike press, did a wonderful job of persuading existing riders that bigger was better. And of course, that means more expensive and presumably selling at a bigger profit for dealer and manufacturer. You only have to look at the way sort of the venture bikes have grown from sort of 800, 900 cc to 1200 plus, and of course they have got heavier along with the gain in engine capacity and speed. But it's a strategy with a strictly limited time frame. Now, the 30 or 40 somethings who were buying bikes like my Hornet 20 or 25 years ago might have more disposable income right now, but they're unlikely to be buying another new bike in another 20 years' time. So perhaps it's not too surprising that the manufacturers are starting to look backwards again towards the middleweight machine section of the market, because these bikes are the inexpensive stepping stones for the latest generation of newly qualified riders who want to get a proper bike. Now, if you think what's been around for a while, the Kawasaki's have had their ER6 range out for ages. There's the standard ER6, there's a faired one, there's a Versys, there's also a Vulcan Custom, I've probably forgotten one. The Honda tackled that market themselves with the 500 CB range and the 700 and 750 cc NC ranges. Most recently, Yamaha have jumped in with the MT-07. And at last, the bike press began to take it seriously again, not just as learner bikes for riders to graduate to something ginormous, but to actually recognise these bikes are serious contenders. They're perfectly capable machines. But what each of these manufacturers has effectively done is that they've used what's known as a platform concept. Now, I've talked about this before. Basically, you take a chassis and you take an engine, and then you stick a different sort of set of bodywork on it, effectively to build a different style of bike. The middleweight adventure bikes derived from the base model have pretty much replaced bikes like my Hornet, but they are offering affordable go anywhere, do anything bikes again. So what have Triumph just produced? Well, they have brought out the 660 Trident triple engine, nice little light, fairly small, fairly compact machine. I looked at when it first came out, and oddly enough, my customer yesterday, my trainee, had a brand new one, and look at it from front to back. It's a nice enough looking machine until you get to the end of the tank, at which point it sort of adopts the modern style of having what I call a 1+1 seat. Really, it's a solo bike that you could just about put a passenger on for a short trip, but it certainly wouldn't be a machine I would be contemplating carrying a passenger on for any distance, and probably not at all, in fact, judging by the lack of pillion facilities. They're certainly not a bike that's aimed at riders who want a two-up machine. It's aimed directly at the new rider market, many of whom will have insurance that only covers themselves solo on the bike. And it's also aimed quite clearly with one eye on lady riders, because it is relatively tiny in terms of dimensions, which makes it easier to handle. So Louise was certainly enjoying her bike when we were out on the Performance Bends course on Friday. So what if you want a two-up, go anywhere, do anything bike? Well, there are those adventure bikes from the other manufacturers I've already talked about, but it is a niche in the market that Triumph have almost completely ignored until now. So have a look at the photo here. If I manage to get the photo up on screen, I forgot to do this earlier. Here we go. There we go. That should be popping up in front of you now. Let's get the full thing up there. There it is. That is the less press leak and more sort of information dribble out to the press, and it is a Triumph Tiger 660 Sport. They said they're testing it in prototype form at the moment, according to what's come through the press, but I suspect that's pretty much as it will be finished. I can't imagine there'll be much change from that. It all looks fairly standardized. So the sort of teaser press release shows a bunch of images of this particular machine, and you'll see it's pretty much now the conventional adventure bike styling. You've got longer travel front suspension on the machine. You've got the sit-up riding position with the higher bars. The foot pegs are further forward and they're lower down as well. You get a proper two-person seat. The pannier racks are integrated into the machine, so at least you don't have to buy a huge fitting kit to bolt the panniers on, and you've got enough bodywork there to keep at least some of the weather off without the machine being too vulnerable in a sort of a minor drop. The word is that the 660 motor in that particular bike, which is already based on the old Street Triple 675, so they're reusing quite a lot of technology there, will be retuned for more mid-range torque, and it will also be available in a full power and an A2 license form for certain. Expert analysis, people who know what they're looking at, say that the frame looks identical to the one on the 660 Trident, which would be obvious choice, but with a longer swing arm, which would make it more stable and probably handle better with a passenger and luggage too. The 17-inch front wheel up front suggests that it is aimed specifically at road use rather than off-roaders. Come back to that at the moment. There are other unchanged elements. The same Nissin brakes appear to be used on both models. And the other thing you can pretty much expect is that the electronic package will be exactly the same too, to keep costs down. So you'd get two riding modes: slip and assist clutch, switchable traction control, and TFT instruments. So what's the bike aimed at? Well, it's pretty obvious really. It's a direct competitor for the Tracer 7 from Yamaha, and to a lesser extent the Versys from Kawasaki, which is a pretty underrated model in my opinion. I don't know quite why it's never sold as well as it should have done. It's likely a third model will appear, an off-road oriented version, which will have wire wheels, possibly a 19-inch front, possibly a 21, I guess, and the obligatory sort of beak front mudguard. Pricing for this Tiger Sport, well, a good guess would probably be around £1,000 more than the Trident's 7395 starting point. And that would put it on a par with the Yamaha's Tracer 7, but it would be significantly below the price of the Tiger Sport 850, which is also sort of trying to fill in a slightly lower capacity hole in the market. What do we have? A couple of comments here. Clive says not everyone wants to carry pillion or a luggage. Indeed, I don't disagree with that, Clive. So something like the Trident makes a lot of sense, but it does mean that you can't really attach luggage or carry a passenger if you've gone for the Trident. So yeah, it's fair enough. I've got no arguments that people will buy the bike to do what they want it to, but yeah, sometimes there is more options from a slightly better, well, a machine. I'm not going to say better design because that's the wrong term. A machine which is designed with more utility in mind. Paul says many positive and practical aspects to the 660 Sport, and he points up to the low slung exhaust, which appears to be the same as on the Trident incidentally, and that means that both panniers can be the same capacity, which rather than a slimline pannier to avoid getting burnt by a high level exhaust. Yeah, it's a very good point. That one of my pet hates, I must admit, when you open a pannier and find that there's actually nothing inside it because the space in the panniers are taken up entirely by the exhaust. Right, okay, so well, if the Tiger Sport 660 looks like a pragmatic way to appeal to new bike riders with a different set of needs, I have to admit I never cease to be amazed at the marketing bull that the motorcycle industry can turn out to sell kit that nobody really needs to people who ride motorcycles. And the latest is I found a headline in Fashion United, which isn't my usual reading, I hasten to add, but it tells us that Belstaff have teamed up with Royal Enfield on an exclusive collaboration to create a capsule collection. Now, if you aren't into fashion, you probably had to look that term up. I certainly did. And it turns out that a capsule wardrobe is a term that first appeared in the 1940s in American publications. And basically what it denotes is a small collection of garments which are, quote, designed to be worn together, which harmonize in color and line. So in other words, the idea is that you have a few sort of swappable garments that you can wear together rather than having to have a huge wardrobe full of things to try to find things that match. So it's a sort of mix and match. Anyway, the term here in the UK, capsule wardrobe, was apparently revived by a designer with the wonderful name of Susie Foe, who was the owner of a boutique called Wardrobe in the 1970s. Now, move forward half a century, and Belstaff are now collaborating with Enfield on what they're promoting as the Royal Enfield X Belstaff collection. So let's take a quick look at what they are talking about, if I can get the picture to change. Here we go. I'll get there in the end. There it is. I should have got something with a slightly different profile, but yes, I think there you go, zoomed in a little bit. So Belstaff, yes, they're a brand that have firmly positioned themselves away from their old wax cotton utility bike clothing image, the sort of black wax cottons where everything you brushed up against turned black too, as the wax came off the jacket and stuck to whatever you were walking past. Horrible stuff. I hated it. And they basically targeted the heritage end of the bike market. And the link up here is said to celebrate British craft and motorcycling culture with an apparel range and 2 custom motorcycles. So what you're going to get in your capsule collection is a 2 limited edition wax cotton jackets, one styled on the wax cotton Trail Master and the other on the Brooklands armoured motorcycle jacket. The jackets are claimed to be collector's items because there'll be a production run of just 500 of each. And just so everybody knows you've paid over the odds for one of these jackets, they'll feature some special commemorative Royal Enfield 120 anniversary patches on the right-hand sleeve and an additional limited edition riveted metal plaque on the inside the zip, so you can admire that while you're looking at yourself in the wardrobe, because nobody else will see it. Right, as you probably guessed, I'm a bit sort of skeptical about this kind of thing. If you want to complete your look, though, you can buy the heritage-inspired T-shirts, the zip-up sweatshirts, and caps. So there's your capsule collection, and you can get your heritage cuppa in an enamel mug as well. Meanwhile, over at Royal Enfield, their in-house custom team have developed 2 versions of their Continental GT 650 with different color schemes, and they'll be traveling around Europe apparently to visit Bellstar's flagship stores and concessions, and they will have one-of-a-kind liveries and unique design elements. And if you're desperate to get off the mark, the Royal Enfield X Bellstar collection will be available from Royal Enfield dealerships and selected stockists from mid-November. I really can't wait. Okay, don't forget, if you want some reading material, you can also head over to my Lulu store, lulu.com/spotlight//survival skills. For some bizarre reason, it must have the capitals S and S in the URL, or you won't find it. But if you do head over there, you can find some reading material to help you ride better. And what's the last story? Yes. Here's a question for you. Why do women fail the Mod 1 bike tests more frequently than men? Now, according to the latest government driving test statistics, the pass rate for Mod 1 for 2020-2021 was 77% for men, only 57% for women. Now, it's a puzzler for sure, because the pass rate for Module 2, that's the on-road bike test, of course, is identical at just under 70%. So why might that be? Well, one explanation is that women find the bigger machines are likely to be used for taking the A2 and A test on harder to handle than the men, because they are bigger and heavier. And that, in fact, is one thing that has been addressed by the DVSA, because they have lowered the A2 category requirement, which should allow for the use of physically smaller and lighter bikes. And that would make sense, except for one thing. Many of the maneuvers carried out on Mod 1 test are actually replicated out on the road. Although you don't get cones, clearly, some of the sort of tight turns that you're going to have to do, driving around junctions, around the back of mini roundabouts, that kind of thing. The balance, the steering, the ability to stop and ride at slow speed, turn in confined spaces is all pretty much replicated in much, much more trying conditions, because there's other traffic around. And that's the interesting thing, isn't it? That the ladies seem to cope out on the road. It's the Mod 1 off-road test that causes the problem. So what could it be? Well, nerves are possible, except you'd expect them to affect people on the Mod 2 test as well, not just the Mod 1. Interestingly, older data suggests that the Mod 1 figures have actually improved, up from a 72% pass rate for men to 77 and 51 to 57 for women, which means that the gap has almost perfectly been maintained. I'm not sure precisely when those figures were, but it says from 2010, but it's certainly more than a year old. So what is actually the problem? Well, Here's my guess. According to Compare the Market, the top 10 bikes owned by female riders in the UK as of June this year were number one, Honda CBR 125R, CBF 125, Yamaha YBR 125, Honda MSX 125, Honda Vision 110, Kawasaki ER6. That's the first big bike you'll notice at number 6 on the list. Number 7 is the VFR 800 V4 VTEC. Then a Bonneville Street Twin at number 8, and then we're back to 125s, Hyosung and a Honda CG. So I'm a little bit surprised to see the VTEC VFR 800 in that list. But what should leap out of you is that 7 of those top 10 are 125s. Now, my guess is that what's happening is that many women are taking CBT and then they're riding on a 125 on L plates because the belief is that they will pick up experience. And then I suspect they are taking or hoping to take a shorter course of basic training. Now, DAS was introduced in 1997. It was actually one of the very first direct access certificate instructors in the country. I, like many of the instructors at the time, and certainly my school, we thought what we would do is carry on doing pretty much what we'd always done, is teaching people on the 125, but then we just get them onto the bigger bike for the last day or so of the course, and they would take the test on the bigger bike and they'd be fine. And we thought it would be better for the trainees, that they'd find it easier to learn on the little bike. And we thought there'd be a sort of positive benefit as well, as we could see the big bikes ending up getting dropped and bit damaged, and of course, the fuel consumption of something like a CG 125 was roughly double what we were expecting from a DAS bike. So there would be significant cost savings as well for us. But as soon as we got started on this, we learned very quickly, in fact, that in 1997, that the training techniques that we had used on the 125s didn't translate into adequate skills on the bigger bikes. The DAS bikes basically posed a whole different set of problems. Their overall length, the mass, the height as the center of mass meant they were more top heavy. They had a bigger turning circle as well over the 125s, and we needed to work much harder on training on the bigger bikes than on the little bikes. And so what we actually did in just a week or so was switch around. We actually just did the CBT on the 125 and got the riders straight onto the bigger bike for the rest of their training, even if they were complete novices. So what might have changed between then, when there was no Mod 1, and now? Well, I think many riders are no longer looking to book training and test as a package. They are not starting as their training to test as a complete novice. What they're actually doing, many of them, I think, are taking a CBT, buying a 125, zipping around on a 125 for months or years, because they can, and because that they think they can pick up experience that way. And something else I've noticed is that many schools are now offering shorter courses than what we used to offer back in the late 90s. Why is that? Well, it's an incredibly competitive market. There's too many bike schools out there undercutting other bike schools, so it's a cutthroat market. But I think it's also a knock-on effect from many of these riders who take 125 sort of time with the CBT. They go out and do this riding on the road with themselves, and they think that that experience will carry over into needing a shorter course. I mean, I constantly read that kind of advice on bike forums. But does it actually work? Well, when I watched trainees myself who came in after having picked up experience on a 125 and wanted to do a DAS course, what I found was their basic machine control was basically unreliable. Old habits that they picked up on a 125 were really hard to get rid of. Something that many riders would do on a 125 and get away with is dump the clutch when accelerating and changing gear. They would try to control speed round tight turns on the throttle only. Now you can get away with that on a 125 where the clutch is, frankly, it's redundant beyond walking pace. Once you get on something like an MT-07, you actually need the clutch and you need to use something like the rear brake to control speed round corners. If you try and do it all on the throttle with 70 plus horsepower rather than just 10 or 12, you really will notice the difference. So simply put, a 125 is poor preparation for a full-size machine, even if you're jumping to an A2 bike. So it's throttle control issues, turning right out of side turnings and exiting bends is a real problem I see all the time. Gear selection, often going up the gearbox too soon, but also struggling with slow control and clutch issues. Tighter turns, again, not really an issue on a 125 because they're short wheelbase and they will turn tight just because they're small. But it's really important on a bigger machine. And even standard braking in a straight line. Many riders who get onto a bigger bike really don't actually use the brakes effectively on those machines. And I suspect it really is that women are spending more time on 125s than men. I have no evidence to back that up. It's my gut feeling. So, a bit of advice if you are thinking about getting trained up in the near future is get yourself straight onto a full course. If you want a reliable training experience, start from the basics and learn the basics with an instructor. If you try to ride around on a 125 picking up experience, the danger is you're likely to pick up bad experience. Practice doesn't make perfect, it makes permanent. So if you're using poor techniques, all that this time spent on 125 does is make it really, really difficult for you to unlearn it and to start using the right approach when you're finally shown it. I really used to struggle with some of the 125 owners who came in to do a direct access course. So the best time to absorb new skills is when you're actually still learning and not when you've learned those bad habits and the workarounds for riding problems. So I've heard that because I get experience on a 125 advice so many times, and my answer is still the same: get trained properly, get trained to ride the bike you want to ride, and then you'll know what you're doing. Then you'll practice, and then with the practice will come the confidence and the enjoyment of doing something well. Okay, it costs more. The right training tuition isn't cheap, but frankly, you are going to be spending 10 times more on your bike if you buy something like that Trident 660 on your riding kit, on your insurance, and spending an extra couple of £100, maybe £300 to get an extra couple of days training on your bike not only will help you give you a much better chance, I think, of passing Mod 1 the first time round, but it could also help be the difference between avoiding or having a spill later on, because you will be that much better as a biker when you get out there. Right, that's my controversial view for the day. That's it for another show. Don't forget, I'm throughout September, I'm still offering evening riding assessments as we can get them completed by dusk. So if you want your riding checked over objectively, give me a call. The next live online presentation is coming up on the 1st of September. It's the first Wednesday of the month. It's Cornering with Confidence. It looks at some of the techniques I will cover in my on-road courses, in particular the reference point system that I use for mapping out a corner, which allows us to reliably tackle a bend, whether we've seen it before or whether it's the first time we've been round it. So I'll explain how we recognize those, how we spot them on the road, and how to time our machine inputs reliably to those. If you're interested in that, the cost for that is £5, and you can get a ticket from the link which I'm just about to pop up on screen. So that's 8 p.m. Wednesday, the 1st of September, Cornering with Confidence. Hopefully see you out there at that particular show, and of course the next 11s, which is earlier that morning, Wednesday at 11. And just to finish off, Samantha has just said that she agrees she's picked up bad habits from her 125. Yeah, unfortunately, I do worry about people who think they are learning good techniques by riding around on 125. Hopefully you'll crack those soon, Samantha, and you'll get some good experience under your belt. Right, that's it for today. Thank you very much indeed for looking in, and I have my new video, which I've forgotten to fire up, my outro. So look forward to seeing you again. Ride safe out there, and I'll be back on Wednesday with the next show.